My father always told me that the true measure of a man is not the weight of his wallet, but the calluses on his hands. Where are you watching from? This is a fictional story, but the lessons woven into it are as real as the dirt beneath my fingernails. My name is Henry. For the past 40 years, I have built an empire from the ground up, turning a small, struggling construction firm into one of the largest multinational holding companies on the eastern seaboard. But if you looked at me on any given Tuesday, you would never guess it. I wore faded denim jeans, scuffed steel-toed boots, and a worn flannel shirt. I drove a battered pickup truck that rattled over every pothole. I did this by choice. Wealth has a dangerous way of stripping away a person's humanity, and I was determined to remain grounded. I wanted to remember the sting of honest labor. More importantly, I wanted my son Julian to learn the value of a dollar earned through sweat, not inherited through blood. That was why I kept my true financial status hidden from him as he grew up. I provided everything he needed to succeed: a solid education, a secure home, and the opportunity to build his own life. When he decided to launch his own tech and real estate development firm, I secretly directed my investment company to provide the seed capital. Julian believed he had secured an angel investor purely on the merit of his business plan. He thought he was a self-made prodigy. I allowed him his pride, hoping the responsibility would mold him into a leader. But power is a potent intoxicant, and Julian soon developed a taste for the superficial. His transformation accelerated when he met Vanessa. She was a socialite, a woman whose entire existence revolved around designer labels, exclusive guest lists, and the relentless pursuit of status. From the moment Julian introduced her as his fiancé, I knew she was a parasite wrapped in silk. She looked at my wife, Claire, and me, as though we were vermin that had somehow wandered into her pristine world. She despised my rough hands and my quiet demeanor. To her, I was nothing more than an embarrassment, an old handyman who did not fit into the glamorous narrative she was crafting for her future husband. Julian had recently purchased a massive, multi-million-dollar estate in the Hamptons. He claimed he had negotiated the mortgage himself, unaware that my trust fund was quietly underwriting the entire property. To save him money, I offered to help with some renovations. I spent my weekends acting as their unpaid handyman, fixing plumbing, repairing drywall, and restoring an antique wooden staircase that Vanessa wanted replaced with sterile modern glass. My presence infuriated Vanessa. Every time she walked past me in the hallway, she would pinch the bridge of her nose, complaining about the smell of sawdust and sweat. She treated me like a hired laborer, snapping her fingers when she wanted something moved and threatening to withhold payment I never asked for nor received. Julian, my own flesh and blood, stood by and let it happen. He never defended me. He never corrected her. He simply looked away, too weak to challenge the woman who was slowly poisoning his soul. Claire, my beautiful and resilient wife, saw it all. She had recently suffered a mild stroke, which left her dependent on a silver metal walker to get around. Her mind was as sharp as ever, but her body had betrayed her. She bore Vanessa's insults with a quiet dignity that broke my heart. Claire had spent her entire life sacrificing for our family, nurturing Julian with endless love and patience. Seeing our son treat her as an inconvenience was a knife twisting in my gut. I held my tongue, believing that Julian would eventually open his eyes. That was a foolish hope. The rot had already set in, deep and irreversible. The breaking point arrived on a humid Saturday evening in late August. Julian and Vanessa were hosting an extravagant engagement party at the estate. It was a calculated display of power and prestige, designed to cement their place at the top of the social hierarchy. Claire and I were seated at a small, poorly lit table near the kitchen entrance. It was a deliberate insult, a clear message that we were meant to be seen as little as possible. We were dressed in our Sunday best, but our modest attire stood out among the sea of custom tuxedos and haute couture gowns. I did not care about the clothes, but I cared deeply about the look of profound sadness in Claire's eyes. She sat quietly, gripping the handles of her walker, her frail shoulders hunched defensively. As the evening progressed, Claire needed to use the restroom. I offered to help her, but she insisted on going alone, wanting to maintain whatever small shred of independence she had left. Suddenly, a waiter carrying a towering tray of champagne flutes stepped backward without looking. He collided with Claire. She stumbled, her walker sliding across the slick stone. She managed to catch her balance, but her arm grazed the edge of the waiter's tray. A dozen crystal glasses shattered onto the floor, sending a cascade of expensive champagne splashing across the terrace. The music stopped, the chatter died instantly. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the party. Vanessa materialized from the crowd like a venomous snake striking its prey. She wore a stunning crimson dress that trailed behind her, her face contorted with unbridled fury. She did not ask if Claire was hurt. She did not reprimand the careless waiter. Instead, she marched right up to my trembling wife and pointed a manicured finger in her face. "Look at what you have done." Vanessa shrieked, her voice echoing across the silent lawn. "You clumsy, pathetic old woman. You are ruining everything." Claire stood frozen, tears welling in her eyes, her knuckles white as she gripped the walker. I was on my feet instantly, moving through the crowd with a dark, boiling rage building in my chest. "You do not belong here," Vanessa continued, her voice dripping with venom. "You are an embarrassment. Just looking at you makes me sick. I told Julian not to invite you, but he insisted on dragging his pathetic, broken mother to my perfect night. Get out. Get out right now before I have security drag you to the curb." I reached Claire's side and gently placed a protective arm around her shoulders. I turned my gaze to Julian, who was standing a few feet away, holding a half-empty glass of scotch. This was the moment, this was the test. A real man, a decent son, would have stepped between his fiancée and his mother. He would have demanded respect for the woman who gave him life. Julian looked at his shoes. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. Then he looked up, not at Vanessa but at me. His expression was cold, devoid of any filial affection. "Dad," Julian muttered, his voice barely above a whisper, yet loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "She's right. You're causing a scene. You don't fit in with this crowd. It's better if you just take Mom and go home. You're ruining the aesthetic of the evening." Those words struck me harder than any physical blow ever could. My son, the boy I had taught to ride a bicycle, the young man whose college tuition I had quietly paid in full, had just discarded us like trash to appease a shallow, vicious woman. The silence that followed his betrayal was deafening. I did not yell, I did not argue. Anger is a cheap emotion when it is loud. True wrath is silent. True wrath plans. I looked at Julian, committing the cowardice in his eyes to memory. Then I looked at Vanessa, memorizing the cruel, triumphant smirk on her face. "We are leaving," I said softly, my voice carrying a terrifying calm. I guided Claire away from the shattered glass, supporting her weight as we made our long, slow walk toward the exit. But we did not leave alone. From the center of the terrace, Arthur Vance, the CEO of a massive global logistics firm, set his glass down on a nearby table. He was one of the most powerful men in the city. The primary target Julian had been desperately trying to woo for a lucrative contract. Arthur did not say a word. He simply buttoned his jacket, turned his back on Julian, and began walking toward the exit. Following his lead, 3 other prominent board members, men who secretly knew my true identity and the vast wealth I controlled, stood up and joined him. They formed a silent, formidable escort around Claire and me, shielding us from the piercing stares of the remaining guests. Vanessa was completely speechless. Her jaw dropped as she watched the most important people at her party walk out the door in solidarity with an old handyman and a crippled woman. Julian stammered, taking a step forward to stop Arthur, but the older man simply raised a hand, stopping my son in his tracks. The drive home was wrapped in a suffocating quiet. Claire wept softly against my shoulder, the betrayal of her only child breaking her heart into 1,000 irreparable pieces. I held her close, stroking her silver hair, making a silent promise to the dark sky outside the window. Julian and Vanessa wanted to play a ruthless game. They wanted to worship at the altar of wealth and power, believing they were the gods of their own small universe. They were about to learn what happens when you anger the architect of that universe. The following Wednesday, the heat broke, giving way to a miserable, driving rain. Julian and Vanessa were scheduled to be at a corporate retreat for the entire afternoon. I drove my battered truck to the Hamptons estate one last time. I had left some of my specialized tools in the basement, and I intended to collect them and never return. I let myself in through the service entrance, my boots quiet against the hardwood floors. The house was empty, silent, except for the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the massive windows. I made my way down to the sprawling, unfinished basement. Several weeks earlier, while routing some new electrical wiring, I had discovered an old, Prohibition-era vault hidden behind a false wall. Julian and Vanessa did not even know it existed. I had been slowly restoring it, thinking it would make a unique wine cellar. It was a true secret room, heavily insulated and perfectly concealed. I was inside the vault, organizing my heavy wrenches into a canvas bag, when I heard the heavy thud of the basement door opening upstairs. Footsteps echoed down the wooden stairs, 3 distinct sets. I paused, my hand hovering over a heavy iron pipe. Julian and Vanessa were not supposed to be home. This is the only place we can talk without the staff overhearing. Julian's voice echoed through the cavernous space. He sounded anxious, his tone tightly wound. Relax, Julian, Vanessa replied, her heels clicking sharply against the concrete. Everything is perfectly arranged. The paperwork is flawless. Are you absolutely certain about this? Dr. Aris? Julian asked. I recognized the third voice. When he spoke, it was Dr. Aris, a prominent neurologist at the Central Hospital, a man known for his expensive tastes and questionable ethics. The medical records have already been altered, Julian, Dr. Aris said, his voice slick and self-assured. I have documented a rapid and severe cognitive decline in your mother. The scans, the psychological evaluations, the behavioral reports, they all point to advanced, aggressive dementia. According to the file, she is completely detached from reality and incapable of managing her own affairs. Inside the dark, enclosed space of the secret room, my blood turned to ice. My breath hitched in my throat. I stood perfectly still in the shadows, realizing I had just overheard the details of an intricate and deeply evil conspiracy. And the old man? Vanessa asked, her voice dripping with contempt. He's stubborn. He won't just hand over control. He doesn't have a choice. Dr. Aris chuckled coldly. The law is quite clear, with Claire deemed medically and legally incompetent, and Henry being an elderly man with no formal medical training. The state will look to the next of kin to assume power of attorney. That is you, Julian. Once the judge signs the order on Friday, you will have complete legal authority over Claire's medical decisions and, more importantly, her assets. The trust fund, Julian breathed, a sickening tone of reverence in his voice. Over $300 million, exactly, Vanessa purred. We take control of the trust. We use it to fully fund the tech launch and the resort project. We become unstoppable, and as for your mother, she gets quietly moved to that specialized, high-security care facility upstate. They don't allow unapproved visitors. She'll be perfectly safe and completely out of our way. What if my dad tries to fight it? Julian asked, a hint of cowardice breaking through his greed. Let him try, Vanessa sneered. He's a broke, pathetic handyman. We have a team of the most expensive corporate lawyers in the state. He'll run out of money for legal fees before he even gets a hearing. He's powerless, Julian. He's nothing. They had mapped it all out. They were planning to forge medical documents to declare my brilliant, loving wife legally insane. They were going to lock her away in a psychiatric prison just to seize the family fortune that actually belonged entirely to me, hidden behind layers of corporate anonymity. They were willing to destroy a mother's life to fund a tech startup. They thought they had committed the perfect crime, but they had just made a fatal mistake. They had spoken their treason aloud, while the true king was standing in the shadows, listening to every treacherous word. I waited in the stifling darkness of the secret room for nearly an hour after they walked back upstairs and left the house. I did not move. I did not make a sound. The cold concrete chilled my bones, but it was nothing compared to the absolute, glacial fury that had settled over my heart. Julian was no longer my son. He was a threat to my wife, a monster created by his own unchecked greed. And monsters needed to be eradicated. I slipped out of the house unnoticed and drove straight to the towering glass skyscraper in the financial district that housed my true empire. I bypassed the main lobby, using a private biometric elevator to access the top floor. My executive team and my private attorneys were shocked to see me in my work clothes, dripping rainwater onto the expensive carpets. Aris stopped. His hand hovered over his phone. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly, ashen gray. What are you talking about? He stammered, terror bleeding into his voice. I know everything, I said, my gaze pinning him to the spot. I know about the offshore accounts Vanessa used to pay you. I know about the falsified MRI scans you submitted to the court. My attorneys have already submitted the counter-evidence to the district attorney. As we speak, a warrant is being issued for your arrest. Dr. Aris looked like a man who had just been sentenced to the electric chair. He turned and sprinted toward the van, abandoning his unconscious hired muscle, abandoning his briefcase, desperately trying to save himself. I watched the van screech out of the driveway, tearing up the manicured lawn as it fled. I picked up the dropped briefcase, the leather smooth and expensive. Inside lay the fraudulent documents that were meant to destroy my family. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the war was far from over. Julian and Vanessa were completely unaware that their hired gun had failed. They were too busy preparing for their moment of absolute triumph. They believed they had won. It was time to show them how spectacularly they had lost. Saturday evening was the pinnacle of Julian and Vanessa's ambition. They were hosting a massive, highly publicized gala at a downtown five-star hotel to officially launch their new international tech and resort conglomerate. The ballroom was a sea of flashing cameras, diamond necklaces, and tailored suits. Financial journalists, major investors, and politicians mingled, sipping champagne, while a massive digital screen projected the company's logo. Julian stood at the center of the room, radiating unearned confidence, shaking hands with international diplomats. Vanessa clung to his arm, wearing a dress that cost more than most people earned in a decade, smiling triumphantly for the cameras. They were celebrating their ascension to the throne, firmly believing that Claire was safely locked away in a padded cell, and I was sitting at home, broken and defeated. I arrived just as the main presentation was about to begin. I did not wear my work boots or my flannel shirt. I wore a bespoke midnight blue tuxedo tailored in Milan, a subtle razor-sharp display of unimaginable wealth. I walked past the red velvet ropes, the security guards, men on my own company's payroll, immediately stepped aside and bowed their heads respectfully. I entered the grand ballroom, moving with the quiet, predatory grace of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Vanessa spotted me first. Her triumphant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer panic and disgust. She immediately let go of Julian's arm and marched toward me, intercepting me near the massive ice sculpture in the center of the room. "What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed, keeping her voice low to avoid drawing the attention of the reporters. "How did you get past security?" "Dr. Aris was supposed to. Dr. Aris is currently sitting in an interrogation room at the federal precinct," I interrupted smoothly, adjusting my cuffs. Vanessa blinked, her mind struggling to process the information. "You're lying. You're just a crazy, desperate old man. Security. Get this trash out of here immediately," she snapped, waving frantically at the guards near the entrance. The guards did not move. They stared straight ahead, completely ignoring her orders. Julian rushed over, his face pale and sweating under the hot venue lights. "Dad, what is going on? Where is Mom?" Before I could answer, the master of ceremonies tapped the microphone on the grand stage. The sharp screech of feedback silenced the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice booming over the sound system. "If you could please direct your attention to the stage. We are honored to have the primary financial backer of this incredible venture here with us tonight. He is the majority shareholder, the invisible hand guiding this massive project, the CEO of Vanguard Holdings. Please welcome." Julian puffed out his chest, adjusting his tie, stepping forward to accept the applause he believed was meant for him. Vanessa plastered a radiant plastic smile on her face, ready to bask in the flashbulbs. "Mr. Henry Sterling," the MC finished. The spotlight snapped across the room, bypassing Julian entirely, and settled directly on me. The silence that hit the ballroom was absolute. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a vacuum. Every camera lens, every eye in the room turned toward me. Julian froze in mid-stride, his foot hovering inches above the carpet. His jaw went slack. He looked from me to the stage, and then back to me, his mind snapping under the weight of an impossible reality. Vanessa was left completely speechless. Her eyes bulged, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently. She tried to form words, but nothing came out. The handyman she had treated like a stray dog was the undisputed king of her financial world. I walked slowly toward the stage, the crowd parting before me like the Red Sea. I climbed the stairs and stood behind the podium. I looked down at the sea of wealthy investors, and then I locked eyes with my son. "Good evening," I began, my voice cold, calm, and amplified across the massive room. "I am Henry Sterling. For the past 2 years, Vanguard Holdings has been the sole financial engine behind this company. We provided the initial capital, we secured the international permits, and we underwrote every single debt this company has accrued." A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd of investors. They were beginning to sense that this was not a celebratory speech. "I invested in this company because I wanted to believe in the potential of its founder," Julian, I continued, the coldness in my voice intensifying. However, a successful business must be built on a foundation of integrity and moral character. Unfortunately, the individuals running this enterprise possess neither. I signaled the audio technician in the back of the room. The massive digital screens flickered, changing from the company logo to a stark black background. And then, a crystal-clear audio recording began to play over the state-of-the-art sound system. It was the conversation from the secret room. The entire ballroom listened in horrified silence as Vanessa's voice echoed through the room. We take control of the trust. And as for your mother, she gets quietly moved to that specialized high-security care facility. She'll be perfectly safe and completely out of our way. Then, Dr. Eris's voice, the medical records have already been altered. Once the judge signs the order, you will have complete legal authority over Claire's assets. And finally, Julian's voice trembling with greed, the trust fund. Over $300 million. The recording stopped. The fallout was instantaneous and explosive. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another, frantically typing into their phones, capturing the biggest corporate scandal of the decade. Investors stared at Julian and Vanessa with absolute disgust and pure fury. Arthur Vance, the logistics CEO who had walked out of their engagement party, stormed toward the front of the stage. He did not yell. He walked directly up to Julian, grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive tuxedo, and punched him squarely in the jaw. Julian collapsed onto the carpet, blood spilling from his mouth, whimpering in pain and humiliation. The security guards did not intervene. Vanessa fell to her knees, screaming hysterically, realizing that her entire world, her wealth, her status, her future, was vanishing before her eyes. She reached out toward the investors, begging them to listen, but they were already turning their backs and marching toward the exits. They were totally discovered, exposed as the vile, treacherous creatures they truly were. I leaned back into the microphone. Effective immediately, I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos. Vanguard Holdings is withdrawing all financial support, calling in all outstanding loans, and initiating legal action for corporate fraud. This company is finished. Vanessa is replaced. Julian is replaced. The game is over. I stepped away from the podium and walked out the side exit. I did not look back. I did not need to. The foundation had crumbled and the house was coming down. The destruction of their lives was swift and absolute. Within 24 hours, the story dominated every major news network. Julian and Vanessa were no longer the golden couple of the corporate world. They were pariahs, branded as heartless criminals, who had tried to institutionalize a sick mother for money. The banks moved with ruthless efficiency. Since Vanguard Holdings had called in the debts, Julian's company was instantly bankrupt. The massive Hamptons estate, the luxury cars, the offshore accounts, everything was seized and frozen by federal investigators. They were stripped of their wealth, so fast it left them spinning in the wreckage. Vanessa's high society friends, the people she had worshipped and desperately tried to impress, blocked her numbers and publicly distanced themselves. They were entirely devastatingly alone. 2 weeks later, the sky above the city tore open, unleashing a torrential, violent thunderstorm. The wind howled against the windows of our quiet suburban home, driving heavy sheets of rain across the roof. I sat in my favorite armchair by the fireplace, reading a book, a cup of hot black tea resting on the table beside me. Claire was sitting on the sofa, a warm blanket draped over her legs, quietly watching a classic film. The house was peaceful, insulated from the chaos of the outside world. Then, a frantic, desperate pounding echoed from the front door. It was not a confident knock. It was the sound of pure desperation. The pounding continued, accompanied by the faint, muffled sound of sobbing cutting through the roar of the storm. Claire looked up, her hands trembling slightly, recognizing the cadence of the panic outside. I stood up, gently placing a hand on Claire's shoulder to calm her, and walked to the entryway. I did not open the heavy wooden door. Instead, I pulled back the small curtain covering the side window and looked out into the driving rain. Julian and Vanessa were standing on the front porch. They were completely unrecognizable. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by cheap, soaked jackets. Their hair was plastered to their faces, their skin pale and shivering uncontrollably in the biting cold. They had a single duffel bag between them. They had lost the estate. They had been evicted from their temporary apartment. They had nowhere left to go. Vanessa was weeping openly, her makeup smeared into dark circles around her eyes. All of her arrogance, all of her venom, had been washed away, leaving only a hollow, terrified shell. Julian was pounding on the glass, tears streaming down his face, his mouth forming the word "Dad" over and over again. He fell to his knees on the wet concrete, clasping his hands in front of his chest, begging for mercy. He shouted apologies into the wind, screaming that he was wrong, that he was sorry, that he just needed a place to sleep, a second chance, a single dollar to buy food. He was finally experiencing the helplessness he had so cruelly tried to force upon his own mother. Claire moved slowly behind me, resting her hand on my arm. She looked through the glass, her eyes filled with a profound, quiet sorrow. She was a mother, and seeing her child in such agony tore at her heart. She took a breath, ready to reach for the deadbolt, ready to forgive the unforgivable. I gently placed my hand over hers, stopping her. I shook my head slowly, my eyes locked on the pathetic figures kneeling in the storm. "Some rescue missions, Claire," I whispered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Some rescue missions cannot be launched. You cannot rebuild a house on a foundation of poison. If we open that door, they will learn nothing. They are crying because they are cold, not because they are sorry." I let the curtain fall back into place, sealing the window, sealing their fate. We walked back to the living room and sat down by the fire. We listened to the pounding continue for another 20 minutes, growing weaker and weaker, until finally it stopped altogether. They walked away into the dark, freezing rain, swallowed by the consequences of their own monstrous greed. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, but it was the only way they would ever truly understand the cost of their betrayal. 3 months after that stormy night, Claire and I left the city for good. We sold the suburban house and purchased a beautiful, quiet cottage on the rugged coastline of Maine. The air here is crisp and clean, tasting of salt and pine. The frantic, cutthroat world of corporate takeovers and high society galas feels like a distant, unpleasant dream. I formally retired, handing control of Vanguard Holdings over to a board of trusted directors. I took the vast majority of the trust fund, the money Julian had tried to steal, and established a massive charitable foundation in Claire's name. The foundation provides free, top-tier medical care and secure housing for elderly individuals who have been abandoned or abused by their families. We turned a weapon of greed into an instrument of profound healing. Claire's health has improved significantly in the ocean air. She still uses her walker, but her smile has returned, bright and unburdened. Every morning, we sit on the wooden porch, drinking our tea, watching the waves crash against the jagged rocks. As for Julian and Vanessa, the last I heard, they were working minimum wage shifts at a diner in a small, forgotten town in the Midwest. They live in a cramped, drafty apartment, struggling to pay their heating bills. The federal prosecutors eventually dropped the criminal charges in exchange for their complete financial surrender, but the prison they have built for themselves is far worse than any concrete cell. They are trapped in a life of endless, grinding poverty, haunted every single day by the memory of the empire they threw away. They wanted everything, and in their greed, they lost the only thing that truly mattered. Wealth is not found in bank accounts or marble mansions. It is found in loyalty, in respect, and in the quiet dignity of a life lived with honor. If you ever find yourself looking at the people who raised you as a burden, if you ever find yourself valuing a dollar over a parent's love, take a long, hard look in the mirror. You might just be building your own destruction. Thank you for listening to my story. The world is full of dark corners, but as long as we stand firm in our principles, the light will always break through.